You ever seen someone fly fishing and it looks like this? And then you try it and it looks like this? Well, if so, today's your lucky day because I'm going to be breaking down fly casting. Hello and welcome to another episode of Texas River Legends. In this episode, I'm breaking down arguably the trickiest part of fly fishing, which is the casting. When you're casting a fly rod, it really isn't that difficult, but it is very different than casting a spinning rod or a bait caster or really any kind of conventional fishing gear. What makes casting a fly rod different is when you're casting a conventional fishing rod like this. So when you cast a spinning rod or a conventional fishing rod, the weight of the lure loads up the rod, and then as you bring it forward, it unloads and launches the lure. So it's the weight of the lure that loads the rod and allows you to cast. You're casting the weight of your lure, your sinker, be it whatever it is, that's the weight that you're casting. On a fly rod, your fly, no matter how big it is, it has virtually no weight. It is pretty much weightless. And the line is actually much thicker. The line itself has a weight to it due to the fact that the line is the weight that you cast. You can see this line is much thicker, you can see it. Because the fly is weightless, the line is actually what you cast with. This line, the fly line, has some weight to it because this is the weight that you cast. When you're casting a fly rod, that line is actually what puts the load into the rod and what allows you to cast. Watch anyone casting, you'll see that the fly line is casted in a loop. And that loop is what goes out and is actually the weight. That's actually what you're casting. The fly kind of trails along behind, but it's that loop of line that is actually being the weight that you're casting. So in fly fishing, the line is the weight that you cast. The lure, or the fly, weighs absolutely nothing, and you could not cast it even if you tried. It's the line that you have to cast. So that is really the difference, and that's what confuses a lot of people, because if you go out with a fly rod and you try to just kind of cast it the same way you would cast a spinning rod or a bait caster, it will not work because you're trying to cast the weight of the lure and the lure weighs nothing. But you're casting the line, not the lure. That is the most important thing to remember when you're trying to cast a fly rod. You're casting the weight of the line, not the weight of the lure. The line is the weight that you cast. It's backwards from conventional gear. In conventional gear, when you're casting, the lure is the weight that loads the rod and the line weighs almost nothing at all. On a fly rod, the line is the weight that loads the rod and the weight that you cast, and the fly or the lure weighs nothing at all. So you've got to remember that. So when you're casting a fly rod, you're actually going to start with a little bit of line out in front of you, either on the ground or in the water, depending on where you're starting. And you're going to bring that rod back and up. And the thing with a fly rod is you kind of want to cast with your whole arm as opposed to using your wrist to flick it. When you flick your wrist, you're actually going to hear a crack behind you, and that fly line can actually kind of act like a whip, get sort of a whip effect when you're casting with your wrist, and you can actually break your fly off, so you don't want to do that. So what you want to do is start with some line on the ground in front of you, then you're going to pick up, and the basic arm movement is this. You're coming from down in front of you, and you're just coming up like this with your whole arm. Now the real thing about fly fishing is you want to keep it in a straight line. So you want to kind of imagine if you had a paintbrush attached to the end of your rod. You want to imagine that, and there was a ceiling above your head. You want to imagine that that paintbrush is going to paint a straight line, straight back and forth across that ceiling. You don't want a line that's doing this or coming off sideways. You can learn that eventually, but it does make it trickier. And as you start to come in at different angles, you're going to get what's called a tailing loop. And a tailing loop is basically where the line kind of crosses itself and just winds up in a huge mess that is not fun to deal with, trust me. So keep that in a straight line. Imagine that paintbrush. You're gonna come up straight, stop, forward, stop. I guess it would be maybe, 1 o'clock to 9 to 1, basically, I guess, somewhere in that vicinity. You're gonna come up, stop, forward, stop. And the stops are really, really important because it's that stop that actually allows that line to shoot out behind you and shoot out in front of you and unfold. Because like we said, and you'll see in the slow motion videos I have, that line actually is in a loop. That line actually comes out in a loop and then unrolls, and it's that loop that is what you're really casting. So those stops are very important. So the thing with the stop is if you actually don't stop, you're not letting the line unroll behind you. That line starts to unroll, doesn't get to, and as you come forward, it's not all the way unrolled. It's gonna quickly unroll. It's gonna make a cracking noise like a whip, and once again, your leader could snap and you could lose your fly. So those stops are very, very important. I like to actually look behind me when I stop, watch the line unroll, and then come forward and stop, because then you know it's unrolled. You can kind of get it to where you kind of get a feel for it, but you don't have to. You can easily look behind. You really want to come up, stop, forward, stop at about 9 o'clock like this, and then as the line starts to fall, follow it down with the rod tip. Your fly and line will hit the water a lot lighter, but also it'll keep you from, you know, getting tangled and wind up in grass and whatever else is on the ground. Once again, it's 9 to 1. Imagine paintbrush above you, keep that straight line, and it is a up, stop, forward, stop, down, up, stop, forward, stop, down. That's really the basics of fly fishing. Okay, so you want to start with about a rod length of line out from the end of the rod. You can kind of just flick that out in front of you, something like that. And from there, once again, the basic fly cast is you pinch the line just like this. You're going to start off with the line pinched in the forefinger of your casting hand. And from there, the simple basic fly cast is just up, stop, forward, stop, down. Up, stop, forward, stop, down. And you're fly fishing. That's really all there is to it. But as you can see, I didn't achieve much distance because I barely have 9, 10 feet of line out. Now we gotta learn how to shoot line. So I'm gonna show you the easiest way of shooting out line. So that is, instead of pinching the line here in this hand, I like to hold it in this other hand. And you just strip some out. Strip out, you know, a few yards or so, and just let that hang. So you're holding the rod in this hand, you have the extra line in this hand like this. And so what you're gonna do is it's gonna be an up, stop, forward, release. And you're not really gonna shoot out a lot of line at first because you don't have much weight loading that rod, and you don't have a lot of velocity to pull this line out. So you really kind of have to stop and get a little more velocity going with the rod to help shoot the line out at first. As you can see, I'm just releasing that line when I stop coming forward, and that'll help shoot that line out. That's the easiest way I know to shoot line. The lower the amount of line you have out is, the less you have to stop. So when you have maybe 10 feet of line out, it's just a stop for barely a second, just like this. The more line you get out, you really have to pause to let it all unloop. So that's why you want to look behind you and watch it unpause. Hit the roof there. Watch it uncoil behind you, because then you'll start to get a feel for the timing, and you can kind of figure out how long you have to pause for in order to let that line unroll. All you're gonna do is come up, stop, forward, stop, up, stop, forward, stop, up, stop, forward, stop, and follow it down. And you can see I release the line and it shoots out just like that. And that is really the easiest way to shoot line out when you're first starting fly casting. It does take some practice. It is kind of awkward, but once you get it, it isn't really that hard. So go and practice that. So there you guys go. That is the second episode in the How to Fly Fish series. That is how to cast. Get out, practice. It's really not that hard. It's just a little bit different. So remember the things I told you, practice, and you'll be good to go.